Welcome to Growing Bremerton Together and Mayor Lent. Today we're going to be on the Washington State Ferry. You're going to see different passengers on board, lots of noise, but a very special guest. With me today is Lynne Griffith. She is our executive for the Washington State Ferries. She's doing an excellent job. Let's hear about her and what she's doing for our ferry system. Stay with me. Welcome to Growing Bremerton Together with Mayor Lent. As you'll probably notice right off the bat, we're on a Washington State Ferry, and today my interviewee is going to be Lynne Griffith. She is the head of the Washington State Ferries. Lynne, welcome aboard.
Thank you. I should be saying that to you. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. What is your title for us?
I am the Assistant Secretary with the Department of Transportation over the Ferries Division.
And you have a varied background. So let's start at the beginning. Where were you born and raised, and how did you get into transportation?
I was born in Helena, Montana. Grew up in a little town outside Billings, a railroad town, Laurel, Montana, and stayed there until I graduated. And went on to Minnesota, started school, and that's where I began my transportation career. First with the airlines, and co-owned a travel agency with my husband for a while.
I was in travel.
I know that about you. I know that. It must be in our blood. And from there, I followed my husband to the south, a brief stop in Florida, but 20 years in Atlanta, Georgia. And that's where I really developed my transportation skills. I took what I knew in the airline business, and remarkably, you can transfer that into other transportation modes. Spent all of that 20 years working in public transportation. So I've done everything from a startup, ground up, scrub the back of a bus, put in a bus stop sign, to learning how to drive the bus. So I have a well-rounded background in bus and some in rail. I did work for the MARTA system, which is the large transit system right in Atlanta, and they had multiple modes. So I was touching the railroad.
Right.
But as I mentioned, I grew up in a railroad town. There's 3 generations of railroaders in my family. So it's something I must have picked up from my dad when I was a little girl. I always liked big equipment and loud horns. And
so before you got to Tacoma and Pierce Transit, how did you, I want to ask, in Florida, are they ahead of us? The East Coast is way ahead of us when it comes to light rail and multimodal.
Well, again, I wasn't actually in transit in Florida. I was in travel agency type business, but it's Atlanta where I really got very deep into it. And yes, I would say they are ahead of us. And I used to use this as one of my comments is, there was a time when the Seattle Puget Sound area was looking at heavy rail like there is in San Francisco or out in Washington, D.C., and they didn't get where they needed to go, and the money went to Atlanta. So we built the system that was meant to be here. And so there's that in terms of us being behind, and it doesn't mean we can't solve some of the problems. And of course, I've had a great partnership with Sound Transit when I was at Pierce Transit, and that's what they're trying to do, with the advancement of light rail. It's not the same technology, but it'll get people where they need to go. It's more expensive and maybe a little harder to do it in an already built environment.
It is tougher.
We'll get there.
We will. When you were at Pierce Transit, how many years?
8.
8 years, but also a leadership role.
I was the Chief Executive Officer, and that followed on being the Chief Executive Officer at C-Tran in Vancouver, Washington. So that's where I got my executive legs, so to speak.
I sit on our Kitsap Transit Board, and I know how important it is for federal dollars to support the transit systems.
Right.
Because everything is supplemented. Do we have in our ferry system, the federal interest, or do we have federal dollars that help us in the ferries?
We do. Obviously, we are a marine highway, so we share with the rest of DOT in some of the federal highway funds that come to the state of Washington. There's also a small chunk of money that is dedicated to ferry systems that are also vehicle transporters. But we're also eligible for Federal Transit Administration dollars. We are a transit system.
Yes.
I know it's hard for some marine pros to think of us that way, but we're in the business of moving people. We just do it out on the water. So I think there's an opportunity for us to explore a little deeper how we might get in to some of the funding opportunities that the Federal Transit Administration has. I'm sure you already know, we struggle on the federal level as well in terms of getting sustainable funding. We got to get an appropriations bill that's more than a few months long passed before any of us really know what might be available and what might be possible. But we've got our eye on that. I have a good relationship with Federal Transit Administration, and I know the ropes, and so that's on my list.
You have a long list. One of the things is that when you were before leaving Pierce Transit, I know you put a lot of energy to try to get it sustainable. You wanted to have the voters and the users of Pierce Transit to have it so it was always going to last. We were not have to take fight to keep it operating. That was, I think, 18 months to 2 years of your efforts, and I know it was a disappointment. Huge disappointment. We're a citizenry throughout the state of Washington, and especially on this west side, that says we want it, but we don't want to pay for it. So now we're today faced with a budget that was just passed in Olympia, and I'm excited about some of the things that are coming out of that budget. So share with us what the ferry system, what it means to the ferry system with this transportation bill.
Well, very similar to transit, except we didn't have a legislature to help us.
Yes.
Motor vehicle excise tax, when we lost that in 2000, I think is when that actually went away. The sustainable funds for ferry system also was lost. I mean, that was something Pierce Transit went through. C-Tran went through that. In fact, that's about the time I arrived on the scene here in Washington, is right after all the funds went away. And so since then, we've gone biennium to biennium, putting together, through the wisdom of our legislators, operating dollars and essential capital. Of course, we're behind because we've been in, 5-7 years of the worst recession most of us will ever experience in our lifetime.
We've all felt that privately and publicly.
Absolutely. Well, public sector also has felt that very hard. So the legislators, I don't envy what they've had to wrestle with over the last half dozen years. We're coming out of that. You know, there's hope and opportunity now, but we have a lot of pent up need in everything. I mean, bridges, roads, transit, and of course the ferry system.
Yes.
I am extremely happy about where we've landed. I would have loved to have seen sustainable forever, but I understand we have to begin somewhere, and it is looking like we are going to be in good shape for the next 8 years. Of course, there's 8 more, beyond that we have to be thinking about. Now, one of the things I want to share about that, and this is something I've had a lot of experience in all of my points throughout my career, I believe very strongly that public sector is an important role in a community because everybody has a right to have access.
Exactly.
Whether it's to the doctor or school or just getting back and forth from work. So the services are needed, but the services need to run smartly. So that's a little bit of my conservative side surfacing there. I mean, we don't have to be reckless with dollars. So I've always tried to focus on smart ways. What I love about our secretary, Lynne Peterson, is the introduction and really the carrying out of a new process that is going to be part of our future, and that is practical design.
Practical design.
It scares some people because they don't know exactly whether it means you're going to get a cheaper or less result. What it really is just a smarter result. there's ways of doing what we do at
Yes.
ferries that I think we can do very well, but we can do it at less cost.
And another example is practical design. We have standards within the state of Washington, within the counties, and within each city.
Right.
And those standards don't always make the best design. It isn't practical.
Certainly
And
not
it's usually,
cost-effective.
it isn't cost effective, you're
Right.
so right. So having this new setup is not unlike what you're bringing to the ferry system. So let's get from Pierce Transit now to your new title and your new responsibility. One thing I loved about what you did is you did not come in and chop heads and fire everyone. You knew there needed to be cultural changes and changes that you've been hearing about and we've been talking about for decades. But you did have everyone reapply or re-interview for their job to see if their skill level was going to meet what you wanted to do in the ferry hierarchy or in the organizational chart. So what gave you that idea and how did you put it in place?
Well, I've been engaged one way or the other in organizational shifts most of my career. I think it's actually one of my passions is to try to right size, right direct an organization so that we get the kinds of results everybody actually wants,
Sure.
including the employees. And coming into an organization, first of all, they had a lot of vacancies at the leadership level.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, a lot of criticism about folks that may or may not had some truth at times, but by and large was simply inaccurate. There are some good people. There have been some great people that have worked for the ferries, and my predecessor, had his heart in doing the right thing for the organization in terms of blending what the ferry system is with what the communities
Right.
need to know and understand and care about in terms of the ferry system. That is a huge effort, and it's going to help us down the road. I'm here because my background is operations, and we have had challenges in the ferry system, and I don't attribute that to the people. It's the state of affairs. We have a fairly stretched fleet.
Right.
They're workhorses. They're out there 20, 22, some cases 24 hours a day. So our folks literally bend over backwards every night, every day to make sure we're there for the public. And of course, we do have mishaps, in terms of mechanical issues from time to time.
But when you have no break in your operation,
It's going to happen.
it's going to happen.
Now, coming from transit, this is probably the scariest part of this job. Coming from transit, I am used to having a 20% spare ratio. So if something does go wrong, an accident, and it's delaying service, or you've got a breakdown on a bus, you have somewhere to go. You got people back at the garage, and you got a bus waiting in the yard, and you get out there and you
Replace.
recover service.
Mhm.
We actually don't have that for the ferry system. We have one standby vessel. It's the Hayu. It's lovable, but it's very small.
Very
And it's-
small. Is that
and
the
it's-
90 cars?
It's 34.
Oh, that's the little one.
It's itty bitty. It serves a purpose. We've been using it as a training platform, and it's worked great. In fact, I trained on it when I got my ordinary seaman training done. But it is not very effective to send it Bremerton way or
No.
Bainbridge way. It might work inner island up north, but 6-8 hours to get up there is not a viable solution
And it
for a
takes
problem.
longer to cross any waters.
Right. So we are building new vessels, and of course I think that's one very important first step, and we've introduced 2 new vessels here in the last year with the Tokate and now the Samish. Third's underway, which I think's
Chimichurri?
got your initials on it.
You and I together, we were there laying the keel, and I'm saying that's so exciting. My office staff reprinted that newspaper article
Oh, really?
with me doing the B for Bremerton.
That was super fun. I
That
had
was
somebody
fun.
come up to me afterwards, said that you and I were really cute. And we walked down the aisle
we grabbed a hand.
Yes. But, and of course now the legislature has funded the 4th, which I'm ecstatic about. That was
Me
one of my
too.
top priorities, is to keep that contract moving and get the provisions that are in the current contract concluded. without an interruption at the shipyard, because that, of course,
It'll save us some dollars.
Yeah, just increase costs when that happens. So we're building. We're working our, tails off to try to get the maintenance on an ongoing basis figured out. We put together an internal task team that has studied fairly critically what can we do to increase the reliability of an aging fleet. That is going to dovetail in with a review that we're having done by the Passenger Vessel Association.
Yes.
They were here in 2010 and did a good bit of work for the ferry system, actually for the governor. And they're back. And one of their assignments is to also look at the same thing. But what's different this time is I'm putting my subject matter experts at ferries in with them. And I brought transit people into the equation.
That's great.
So that we really look at it with a much broader view, not just a few people that head up ferry systems, but also the people that are in the trenches doing the job.
Right.
So we're hoping that's going to point to some results that we can act on. And of course, we had in our budget request operating dollars to retain a few of the older vessels, get them fixed up a little bit, put them in standby status.
So
we're
you
not
have
there
a spare
yet.
fleet.
We're not there yet,
No.
but we'll have that revisited when we go in with a supplemental. We think that's really important, because at times we feel kind of fragile. We just lose one of our larger vessels,
We are.
which obviously is what happened last summer. It really upsets the operation pretty significantly. So that's on my mind, and I sometimes lose some sleep over it, and every once in a while, instead of counting sheep, I'm counting ferry boats. Trying to figure out if it's all going to work in the morning.
Right.
So,
Lynn, being on this ferry, and we're on the Bremerton run, I met the captain. So that's Captain Bob Corbin.
oh yes,
He
no.
actually is your longest time as far as a master.
He's a staff master, and he's
Staff
one
master.
of our senior. Yes.
38 years, but he's been on this Bremerton run for 17 years. I bring that to your attention and also the audience's because that's the passion I have and our residents have in Bremerton. We love Bremerton, and for him to be on this run that length of time, it also brings up you have an aging workforce. So you have to also be cognizant you've got succession planning and the training that it takes. What are your thoughts and how are you putting that in place?
Well, probably first and foremost is I want to get as much out of the experts that we have here who have grown up as adults on this ferry system, and they know every little in and out, particularly when you get down in the engine room, which there are some complexities. So before they do go on to the next great phase of their life, I want to make sure we're tapping their knowledge, and it's being put to use in either mentoring, apprenticing, folks that are already in the system that want to move up, or that we actually put formal programs in place. I have concerns about this area. It's not an inexpensive process to double up and make sure that the talent that is here now is able to spend the time with folks that want to be.
That's correct.
And it's not inexpensive to start an apprenticeship program, but I actually think we have to bite the bullet and do something about that, because we are licensed deck and engine officers, and if we don't have them, we don't sail.
That's correct.
So that's on my mind, and we're beginning that process, trying to think that through. We will continue to put training dollars as a priority, not because we just want to train people.
They need to be.
It's because we have to do that, and we have to get people ready to replace the great captains and the engineers that we have that have moved this system over the years.
Lynn, how many different bargaining units do you have just in the ferry system?
11. 13 contracts, 11. And I have to say this, I have found them to be very collaborative, very cooperative, and have about the same interest I do. And that is to do great things with the ferry system, do right by our employees, make sure that we're good.
Yes.
Ferry system for the public, they've been great to work with. And I don't know all of them, but their leadership I've come to know. and they're right there beside us trying to figure out how we're going to get through some of the challenges.
You know, coming in as you didn't come up through the ranks of the system and the culture of the ferry. So when we hear rumors and things that go on, you were able to sit down, have a conversation, and the things I've heard about other people that have talked to me is that your style is listening. So you listen to what they have, and then if you see that it has a direction that you can navigate through, that you'll actually let them know that's an area you're going to look into. And then to come back and give them some monitoring that they know you have taken it seriously and that you're kind of moving in a direction that they've wanted to do for a long time. So that freshness, I think, is what is also they're willing to work with you because you're so willing to work with them.
Well, they're the experts.
They are the experts.
You know, and if there's anything I've learned over my career is, you know, you shouldn't be afraid to say, I don't know how to do that, but show me how to do that. So I've done that in every job. If I've come in and I'm now confronted with a whole maintenance team that I don't know anything about the buses, I say, put me out in the shop so I can figure out what you're doing. I mean, I won't be a mechanic, but let me understand your job a little better so I can be a resource, a facilitator for you. I've torn down transmissions, I've changed oil, buses, you know, and now, you know, I went through with the secretary ordinary seaman training and really got an eyeful.
I bet.
Of what our crews go through, and I'm just amazed of how skilled they are, how much focus on safety and emergency response, and obviously we are confronted with that pretty regularly. After doing that, I had a staff chief from the engine room say, well, when are you going to go through training in the engine room? And now terminals has asked me that.
So they're all looking for you to take.
Yes, they're proud of what they do. And what better way to get the leadership of this organization to understand how important they are than to get right in their shoes, in their overalls, and do a little bit of what they do. I'll never be as good as them, but I have an appreciation and a respect that goes beyond the normal that I have for employees.
Sure.
I've always been focused on employees, but now I understand what they do is incredible.
Another characteristic that you portray is telling the public really what's going on. If there is an issue with staffing, with manpower, with the boats themselves, you want the public to know and not try to cover it up and behind the scenes. So you're the first one to say there was an error, this is what happened, and this is how we're correcting it. So I think that's something that we as riders, the commuters and the tourists that take advantage of this great ferry system, it's good for us to know that because we have more confidence in you now.
Thank you. Thank you. I've always tried to be a straight shooter and make sure that people, including our employees, know what I know about a situation, unless there's some legal reason I can't talk about it. So it's not fun, you know, to pick up the phone and talk to a reporter or get in front of a camera and say, you know, we dropped the ball, we made a mistake. But, you know, I think people can respect the fact that we're just human and things are going to happen. And if we just surface it, we had a good example yesterday where we had an incident on the Coopville landing.
Right. Yes.
And the
shallow water.
The new public information officer, Ian Sterling, godsend to me, that is on board. He picked up the phone, he called all the news teams, and it was like, what? They weren't used to that.
No.
And I think they truly appreciate it. So now that's proactively managing the message and the issue instead of waiting for somebody to have to come up with a public disclosure request and pound on our door and ring the phone off the hook trying to get info. It's just give them the info.
Yeah, and I like that proactive. Reactiveness is like you're almost making an excuse, so we didn't want that. What about our reservation system? I talk with the people in the San Juans, and they need it. We know they need it, and we have the basic. So are we getting to where we need to be in that one reservation system?
Well, It's a complex system in the
Yes.
islands, a little bit different than the Port Townsend Coopville, because we had multiple destinations. We had to figure out a way to ensure a balance between local travel and tourism,
Yes.
which is a big draw. And we relied pretty heavily on the San Juan Partnership Group to help steer that. I think we steered ourselves into a pretty complex situation that we're navigating over this summer with some great success.
Right.
Ridership is up. We have reduced the wait times, and the long lines that back up into the local streets are basically gone.
That's
Maybe-
amazing.
And and that was part of the goal, is
Yes.
to manage that. But there are some issues that haven't worked perfectly.
And the cell phone system doesn't work on every place on the island. So
That's true.
when they're trying to take and text and do the modern thing, there's some hampers.
Yeah.
So maybe the state and or the islands or federally, we can get a tower or do something that improves that side of it, because your phones ring off the hook when someone can't do
That's
it
true.
online.
That's
we see
true.
that that's not under your control.
Well, and we've learned a few lessons in the public process that actually has preceded me that maybe we could have done differently to help with that, because islanders don't stay glued to technology, and they don't watch TV every night. They're out enjoying the beauty of whatever drew them to the island. So how you communicate is certainly going to be an important step. We were asked to make some changes. I think we tweaked a few things to try to make the loading work better. I hope that, knock on wood, has streamlined a little bit. Some of the other requests that people want us to look at, number one, not everybody agrees about what the solution is.
Right.
So I think we got to dig in a little bit more. And the other issue is it would be a big change to the system, and the disruption in the middle of a peak season would maybe not be a good idea right now. But we have planned this fall, I think late September, a partnership meeting. We're going to expand it.
Good.
And maybe bring some new voices into the discussion. And we're ready to make the changes. The design of the system was really kind of in response to this group. There was an easier way of approaching it, but we tried to be respectful of what they were believing would be a good solution. And it has been a good solution. It's just not great for everybody yet. And some of that comes in time. It's hard to shift gears and make changes, and this is a big change.
Right. Before we wrap up our visit, what's going on with the seawall and the Coleman dock and the things that face us at that Seattle terminal?
Well, I'll start by saying when it's done, everybody's going to love it. But getting there is tough. It's hard on our customers because we're right in the midst of it.
Yes.
Progress is being made. There's funds that were put in our budget, that are beginning to address some of the gaps associated with the work that we want to do. And of course, we're sandwiched in there between some pretty big projects. The seawall, I'm not the best one to speak about progress. I think it's a little behind, but it's moving. I saw a tremendous improvement down there just coming to get on this ferry. There's people out walking around. And cars can get back in there to some of the businesses and restaurants where they couldn't just a few weeks ago. So that's good. But I'm sure everybody's looking forward to it being done.
Lynn, I appreciate you coming on board. I'm glad I'm on your vessel, on one of your ferries. And when we get the Chimacum, and we're going to have it on the Bremerton Run, let's meet again. Let's let the audience know what the new boat is like and all the changes that will take place in the next couple of years. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Thanks for being with me today. I'll see you next time.